Hi, everyone. Welcome to this virtual village of women gathered here from all over the world to share their stories of birth and motherhood as a means to empower each other through storytelling. I'm Bibi Lorenzetti, and I'm here today with Kimberly Johnson, who is a somatic sex healer. I might be saying this wrong, an author and a mother. I'm going to let you, Kimberly, best introduce yourself. And I'm so grateful you're here with us today. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. Somatic sex educator. My
Educator.
training is in somatic experiencing trauma resolution and sexological bodywork. And I wrote a book called The Fourth Trimester, a postpartum guide. And then I just wrote a book called Call of the Wild. And I'm also a single mom. My daughter's 14 now.
Okay. And so where are you originally from?
I'm from California. Born in the Bay Area and raised in San Diego.
Okay. And how did your life evolve from there? And what brought you into motherhood, into wanting to have a child? And where were you when you were pregnant? If you can tell me a little bit of how that story kind of stitches together.
That's a long story, but I have lived a lot of different places, but I always wanted to be a mom. I always knew that I wanted to have a home birth. I never knew anyone who had one, but I just, since I was a teenager, knew that I would have a home birth. And I was in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil when I had my daughter.
Okay. And so did you have to figure out, because I know I've interviewed a couple of people that are from Brazil, and two of them gave a home birth, but they said they recently had births, and they said that it still was pretty hard for them to find the community, the network and the community of midwives and doulas, that it's still very much hospital centered and cesarean sections and all of this. So cesarean birth. So I'm wondering if that might have been even harder then, or if you felt like you arrived in a place where that was very much part of the fabric of life.
I moved, so I was living on an island. And when I found out I was pregnant, I started Google searching and researching midwifery. And what I found, it was a little bit hard to find, but once I found it, I went to Rio, which was about 3 hours from where I lived, and met with Eloise Alessa, who was my midwife, and I moved so that I could be close to her. So it's kind of ironic these days. I had to move from a sort of isolated region to a city to have a midwife, because I think people normally think that midwives live more, in rural areas, which is true in the Amazonia and in the north of the country. But I moved to the city so that I could have her care. Okay.
And so do you want to share a little bit about just how your pregnancy was and how you might have prepared for the labor? We'll start from there, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into all of that.
My pregnancy was the first trimester. I was in Colorado, which was where I was living at the time. So I got pregnant while I was in Brazil, and then I went, quote unquote, home without knowing I was pregnant. And then when I got to Colorado and found out I was pregnant, I decided to stay for the first trimester there, because I didn't really want to travel in my first trimester, and I wanted to make as much money as I could before I moved back. And then, I would consider the pregnancy at the time. I swam a lot in the ocean. I was doing work that I liked, but I was in a totally new place, in a totally new relationship. So there was a lot of ups and downs with that. My daughter's father smoked a lot of weed, and I didn't really know that. I hadn't really noticed that before. And so that was really troubling for me and sort of hard to figure out. And then, I knew already that I wanted a home birth, and that was really new for him. So we were having all my midwifery appointments in Portuguese, which was a language that I had just learned. So I still can't quite understand how I even did that. But I did. I arrived to Brazil the first time in September 2006, and our midwifery appointments started like March 2007, and they were all in Portuguese. So,
Wow.
There are a lot of changes. I moved a lot of times. Her dad had to get surgery, so we moved home with his family. So I lived with my sort of in-laws who spoke no English, and he doesn't speak English either. So, there was a lot of, I do remember having a phone call with my mom where she said, you can come home, like you don't have to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that really wasn't an option because I felt like I had made this choice and this was my daughter's father, and I needed to find a way to make it work out no matter how it went. So that wasn't exactly smooth sailing, but overall, I was really happy to be in Brazil. I was happy to be pregnant, and the prenatal, once I moved to Rio, so for the last couple of months of my pregnancy, I went to a prenatal yoga class. I was already a yoga teacher for a long time, so the yoga was kind of silly in a way, but I enjoyed being with other pregnant women. And then my midwife also had a group of women who were all due around the same time. So we would have kind of movement classes and experiences together. So I think that my pregnancy was, in my life at that time, I was used to being really nomadic. So it didn't seem particularly, hard to be so uprooted or anything. I do remember feeling I needed a lot more creature comforts than I was used to needing. And that was making my daughter's father really annoyed with me. And, all through my teens and 20s, like I had gone to India and lived off of $1 a day and slept on the floor and slept in places that I was sharing with monkeys and cockroaches, and I was fine with it. And when I was pregnant, it was like, I at least wanted a mattress, I like the floor, like I sleep on the floor, but I'd like a mattress on the floor. And so I just became like a little bit more high maintenance relative to being extremely low maintenance. And so there were some things like that I noticed, but overall I was content, to really happy to be pregnant. And
did you feel like even though everything around you was a little bit up in the air and so hard to grasp because you couldn't really speak or involve yourself with communication in that way, did you feel like you were still able to be like inward in your body? Do you feel like that helped you, or that made it harder for you to also have an inward experience of it?
I feel like I definitely had an inward experience. I enjoyed being pregnant a lot. It was something I always wanted. And then I think I was about to say I had a relatively easy pregnancy, but then all of a sudden I realized that I remember that I had scabies for like 2.5 months, and we didn't know what it was. So I was just extremely itchy. And then we were passing it back and forth, and we went to like four different doctors because we didn't know what it was. And then finally it was actually a OBGYN who was like, you have to sleep separately for 10 days because you're just passing it back and forth. But I was taking 2 showers a day with this foaming soap and letting it dry. And yeah, so, it's life, right? So stuff happens, right. But yeah, I felt connected to myself and connected to my baby.
That's great. And then in terms of going into labor and birth, so you prepared for a home birth. Was this did you have a home, or was this at your in-laws' house, or how did you prepare for that?
I looked for one. So when I moved from the island, then to my in-laws, then to the city, that was like, we had to look for a place. And when we looked for a place, every place we looked at, we had to imagine, can we have a baby here? And that was another thing that made me feel more high maintenance. It was like, yeah, okay, maybe I can live here, but I can't actually have a baby. I can't give birth in this place. So it was really hard to find a place to live, because in Rio, you have to sign a contract for like 30 months. And I had no idea. I was just trying to find a place for 3 months. So we sublet a place. Turned out it was an illegal sublet. So the cops actually came to our apartment like a week before I was giving birth, took all the furniture out. My mom, who speaks no Portuguese, went like out on the street to try to like buy us mattresses. And then the day after I gave birth, the people who lived upstairs started construction. So it was just like, I gave birth on a Sunday, and then on Monday it was like a jackhammer on top of my head.
Wow.
So yeah, we had to find a place.
It's like a lot of navigation of like really intense moving waters. You're just like surfing on it at the most challenging time challenging and beautiful time of woman, but definitely hard to stay solid in yourself with all these things, chaos is around.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that people have this idea like you can make this perfect space and hire all the right people and stuff, and that somehow that's going to make it all easier.
Right.
And, I don't know, because I never had another pregnancy and another birth, so I'm not sure. But it was definitely, it was really hard for me when my mom left, because that was like something that was familiar. It was hard to be in so much unfamiliarity, but at the same time, it was just what was happening. And I wasn't working. So, my daughter was born at 42 weeks. So those last 2 or 3 weeks, I had nothing to do. Like I was just kind of like hanging out, going to my midwifery appointment, eating ice cream, taking a nap, 12-hour nights, just like how am I possibly 14-hour nights of sleep.
That's nice.
Yeah, it wasn't like I was stressed out because I had to be at work or I had to take care of other kids, or it was just kind of like, okay, this is a wild ride, but here we are.
Right. I think it's very refreshing to hear a lot of the women that, are either birthing with me now or have come on this, they had babies during the pandemic, or they're having babies during the pandemic. And I feel like, we're so settled and used to our comfort zones and having everything that we need. And whenever something like a pandemic hits, it's like all of a sudden your primal needs are just torn away and you're just left like kind of floating. And so it's really nice to hear that, when you're so used to very little and you're stripped away from even more than what you have, you're kind of used to it. You're used to floating with very little, and it's less disrupting to all of a sudden just have even less. So I feel like it's such a nice reminder that we are so privileged to be able to choose all these, the candles and the setting, and it's such a gift that we have that we can choose that. And so it's really great to hear that you were fine, having the police come a week before and take away all your stuff and just having a mattress. So it's really refreshing to hear that. Do you feel like you felt settled going into then your actual so how did the birth, or how did the labor begin, and how did the birth come on?
Well, around 42 weeks, I started taking some homeopathics, and Krishna Das actually was in town in Rio. So I waddled my way into a Krishna Das concert, and I kind of, I knew Krishna Das. So basically I, walked through the place, and, I was hugely pregnant. Everyone's looking at me like, is it going to happen like now? Like, are we all going to be privy to like a birth here? And, walked my way to the front, and then was taking my homeopathics and chanting, and then went home. That day I had eaten like 2 pieces of cheesecake around 3:00 in the afternoon. So I wasn't hungry. So I went to bed, and then I woke up around 3 a.m. and knew finally for sure that I was actually in labor. Cause I like a week earlier, I had been up all night for like 6 or 8 hours with contractions, thinking that like, okay, this is it. And then they subsided and didn't happen again for another week. So this time I was like, all right, this is happening. And then my daughter's father worked nights. So I called him and told him, because he was at work. And then around when he came home, I tried to get back in bed for a little while. And then around 7:00, I was up on the couch in the living room and already just kind of going into the zone. I turned on my soundtrack, heard one song, and was like, no freaking way I'm listening to music right now. My parents were staying with me. My mom was actually at that point. My dad had already gone home. My dad came at 41 weeks. Oh no, he was there. He came at 41 weeks, and he just stayed one day after my daughter was born. And then they went to a hotel, because that's what the midwife
were they there
recommended.
with you during the early labor part, and they left in the midwife? Okay. So you weren't fully alone during that time. Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
they left. So at 7, I was in labor. I remember my mom came out and then my dad came out and was like totally like scared. So my mom sent him out like to go get orange juice or something. And then Eloisa came around 9 and like with a shopping cart with all her gear. And then
The shopping cart. That's
my
cute.
parents left, and she left, and basically everyone left, and including my daughter's father. And then at some point he came back and he had like lunch and a beer and then fell asleep. And then Elo came back and in the like early evening. So I was like, people were kind of in and out, but Eloisa thought that my daughter's father would like actually be around more and like be kind of holding down the fort, so to speak, but that was not the case. But
So you
everybody was
were kind of
confused.
holding yourself through this by yourself. You were moving around and dealing with the labor.
Yeah. I was pacing the apartment and kind of like walking the perimeter and then going to the bathroom and, just, I mean, yeah, there wasn't very good communication, which is not surprising considering that not everyone spoke the same language. But my mom really wanted to stay. That Elo had already told me beforehand that she thought it would be better if my mom wasn't there. And I wasn't really sure because I was like, I'm just like everyone. It's not like my mom and I are best friends. Like she's my mom and we have our own conflicts, and I just wasn't really sure how that would be in labor. And so she was kind of like, well, I mean, she wanted to stay, but I was like, I don't know. And so they went out to Baja to have like lunch with their friend. And then, she checked in with me. But yeah, around 5 in the evening is when the midwife came back and then her team came back. And then my daughter was born at 4 a.m.
Okay. And I know it's been a little while, but what do you feel like was your experience of navigating that time by yourself? Do you recall like it as a good memory, as like a challenging, what's your memory of that? Because that's pretty particular to be alone in that time. I mean, I know that I've had clients that choose to then be alone, like they send their partners away or they don't call the doula, or, they turn into these more nocturnal animals that just want to be in their own power without anybody. So, but that's a choice. So I'm wondering what your memory of that time is, and then just looking back, how you feel about yourself, that memory of yourself.
Mm. Definitely for a long time, a big part of my story was that like, especially around like 4 p.m, like I was alone. And then I kind of made a pact with myself, like, okay, me and my daughter are alone and it's us against the world kind of thing. And so when the midwife came back, it was hard for me to not accept her care, but it was just, I just felt really distant and removed. Like, I'm just going to do this. Like, I can't really count on this. So I'm just going to figure it out myself. And the earlier time, I think I was definitely in labor land. So I was in an altered state, and and at that point, there's just not so much evaluation, it's just kind of like,
Right.
okay, this is what's happening. And I definitely didn't feel like I'm going to like take charge and go wake up this person and go call my mom and tell her to come and like change the whole plan. I felt like, okay, this is what I chose. This is where I am. And now this is how it has to go, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's really powerful. And I feel like that's probably shaped also how your relationship is then with your daughter, of this, like, from what you said, of making this pact of just like the two of you traveling through this together. That's really beautiful. Do you feel like that's informed the way that you and your daughter still relate?
Definitely.
Yeah. And then, so how do you recall the birth? How did it go?
The moment when she actually came out.
Mm-hmm.
The moment when she came out, so I had a pretty long pushing phase because she had a very short cord, which I didn't know at the time, but I only knew once she came out why, because I could tell that her head was really perfectly placed and I could feel the power of the contraction and the pushing, but it was taking forever. She was like going down and coming back up and going down and coming back up. So eventually I was standing and I had one leg up on the bed and I was kind of leaning over the bed. And my midwife actually said that I was the only person, she'd only seen 2 people give birth like that. And the other person also had a short cord. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And when she was crowning, I called to her dad because he was in the other room. And so he came in, and then yeah, that moment, you know, they caught her and then just handed her right to me and kind of pushed me on the bed, and then I had her right away. And it was I didn't like cry right away. I'm a big crier normally, but I didn't like cry. I was pretty much in shock. You know, I'd been in labor for, I don't consider that a long birth. I consider that pretty average for
I was gonna
the
say
first
that.
time. 24 hours, 26 hours.
Yeah.
But you know, I was tired. I didn't eat much. I knew that I could, but I really wasn't hungry. And I basically pooped with almost every contraction. So I remember them saying like, oh, do you want to know if it's a boy or girl? And I was like, I really could have cared less at that moment. And then they were like, what about my husband, or her dad was like, well, what about her name? And I'm just like, we had 2 names picked out, and I was like, yeah, sure. You know, like I just wasn't even, I was like, I'm just done. Like, okay. So
let me rest for now. I'll deal with all
then
of
my
that
mom
later.
came over in like 45 minutes and she was like, oh, she's such a beautiful baby. And I go, she is. And then a few minutes later, I was just telling my mom, like, this is all bullshit. Like this whole thing about men and women being equal, like, what the fuck is that? That makes no sense. I was like, that is a lie. And I was like, why didn't you tell me what this was like? And she's like, I try to tell you. She was like, because we in that yoga class I was at, that we would say the movie of the women in the Baltic Sea that are just kind of like laughing, and then the baby just comes out, you know. And my mom was there watching that with me, and she's had 3 kids, and she was just kind of like, I didn't know what to say, you know, like I didn't want to burst your bubble, but you know, that's not exactly how it goes a lot of the time.
Yes, it's funny you bring that up, because I've been, you know, my mother is a very hardcore feminist, and I've always kind of had, I think as a result of that, a little bit of sensitivity towards all of that, until I feel like, you know, I've always been really lucky with partners that were also very accommodating of everything. And I'm always the one that has more work and makes decisions. And when I gave birth, I also had this realization of like, how is this? We are not equals, and this is never going to pay off. Like there is nothing that he can do that is going to make up for all of this. It's a huge thing, but we're so lucky that we can do that. That we're
I mean, I don't think about it like there's nothing. I don't think that there's any like compensation necessary for it. It was more of my conditioning being like told that, you know, I could do anything that a man can do and I can do it better, and that I should somehow try, and that, you know, and it was just like, this is all just seemed absurd to me. Like the fact that that's even like, we're even having that conversation, like this is, look at this, like, well, look, I mean, we're different species basically.
Yeah. And so how was, did you breastfeed right away?
When she was ready. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And how was that for you? How was the breastfeeding?
I thought it was pretty easy right at that moment. I just didn't realize that the next day it would hurt like hell. But yeah, at that moment, everyone says the latch is so uncomfortable and everything, but the first latch was fine before my breasts were sore, you know? Yeah. And then eventually that became a bit of a harder journey.
Okay.
But yeah, at that moment it was good.
And when you say a harder journey, do you want to share a little bit about, you know, what was hard about it and how you dealt with it? Because I feel like a lot of women struggle with that.
Well, I don't know exactly what happened, but I think just due to the amount of stress that I was under, and not have, my mom could only stay for another week, and my daughter's father worked nights. And so I was really just left completely alone with an infant, and I was injured from the birth. So I had a bad tear, and it wasn't healing correctly because the material that they sutured me with, my body rejected the material. So it was hard for me to walk. I was in a lot of pain. And so it was hard for me to go to the grocery store and cook food for myself and do all those things. And as a result, I think my milk supply just went way down. I don't have any way of knowing that, but I went to a milk bank. I lived close to a hospital that was like a preemie hospital where they had a milk bank, but they wouldn't give me milk because my daughter's not a preemie and she didn't have something specifically wrong with her. But they did have nurses and lactation consultants. So I would walk from my house, like a mile and a half or 2 miles, and take my daughter and then try to get help with breastfeeding. And some of them, each nurse would say something different. Some of them would squeeze my breast, a drop or two would come out and they'd say, look, you have plenty of milk. And then others would say no. And then one day I was in the Pracinha, which is near my house, and everybody goes with their babies at different times. And the woman next to me had gigantic breasts, and her baby was gigantic. I mean, he literally could barely move because he was so big. He looked like a football linebacker. And my daughter was really tiny. She looked skinny. She was tiny. She was not a tiny baby. She weighed 8'3", but she just wasn't gaining a ton of weight. And I didn't want to be weighing her all the time. So I just was kind of noticing what was happening, and she wasn't sleeping well. So, I mean, she was sleeping okay at night, but she was nursing all the time. And there was never a break. I never had a time where she would stop nursing and then fall asleep and then start again. So I didn't really have time to fill up. So the woman in the Pracinha asked me, do you want me to try nursing her? And I was like, yeah, because I thought I didn't know this person well, but I just could tell my daughter, I mean, she was going back and forth and restless. So she just nursed for 10 minutes on one of that woman's breasts that only went down halfway, and then fell asleep and crashed for 2 hours.
Wow.
And, I just, of course, was crying and, felt terrible.
I'm about to cry.
Yeah. It's felt completely horrible. But then
so
I had another
on
friend
mom
who was weaning at the same time, who I had met also in the Pracinha. And so since she was weaning her baby, she would give me the milk that she had a ton of milk. So I could supplement with her milk. But the woman in the Pracinha who nursed her, I just didn't know her very well. And I didn't feel I could ask her to do that every day. And I also was wondering about things like safety, am I supposed to get the milk tested? And I don't feel like I can go ask this ask this person who just nursed my baby if she's going to go get an HIV test. I'm not doing that. So I made it work with the supplemented milk from my friend Camila. I was doing it through a sonjinha, through a little straw, and then nursing off my breast. But
so she was still on your breast with the
supplement. Straw. Yeah. But then eventually there just wasn't enough Camila's milk. She stopped nursing. She didn't have extra anymore. And so I had to supplement from around 2 months till around 4 months, maybe 10 weeks to 16 weeks. And then my daughter got teeth. She got teeth at 3.5 months.
Wow.
So when her teeth came in, then I was like, you know what? She's also born 2 weeks after her date. I'm she can have a little bit of food, and I'd much rather give her food than breast milk. I tried giving her organic breast milk. So when I was in Brazil, I didn't have an organic choice. I made some, but I wasn't so sure about it. But then when I came to the US, I came for a couple of weeks. I started her on organic formula, and it gave her just horrible gas and diarrhea. And then I didn't think that's what it was, but then I switched her back to the other formula and she was fine. But then eventually I was able to once she started with the food, I just took out the formula and went back, and I had enough milk to nurse her together with food. And then I nursed her till she was like 2 years and 3 months.
Oh, wow. So you kept going for a long time with that
Yeah.
system. That's great. Yeah, that's so important to hear because, yeah, there's so many women that it becomes so frustrating. And then because of people coming at you with their ideas, it's so easy to want to give up. So it's really refreshing to hear that. Thank you for sharing that. That's definitely worth hearing. And then in terms of your recovery, since you said that you were, there was a lot going on, what did you do in a foreign country to take care of yourself, to heal?
Well, we had a bidet in my apartment. So I used the bidet and did kind of like sitz baths.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't even know there was such thing as postpartum time. So that's sort of the double-edged sword of my book, is that now people know the care that they should get, but it's so hard to get it. And so, but I had no idea. So I wasn't thinking about that. I was just trying to get enough to eat. And even that was hard. So I wasn't doing anything to care for myself other than, do a sitz bath and, try to get enough to eat.
Wow. But how did you come out of that? How did your body then eventually just healed over time, or did you have to come to the United States to take care of healing your vagina and the stitching and all of that?
It took me that's why I wrote the book. It took me about 6.5 years. So, I was really
the book
depleted on a lot
is
of levels.
amazing. Yeah.
And when my daughter was 9 months, I came to the States, and it was partially to care for myself. It was more to care for, I knew that I wasn't getting better, and I didn't know where to go. It's not that care didn't exist in Brazil. It's just, I didn't know where to get it.
Yeah.
And I wasn't confident that I was understanding Portuguese. Basically, I was like, I think I understand most of what the doctor's saying, but I don't understand everything. And I didn't really trust I don't trust doctors, period, but I definitely wasn't trusting the doctors there because I didn't have any reason to, really. And there's suspicion of home birth, and it was really expensive. And I was just like, I needed to go back to something that was familiar. But even when I came back here, I went to a doctor and I just told her what my symptoms were. And she said, okay, you need a full surgical pelvic floor reconstruction. But she told me that without even looking at my pelvis. So she told me that just by talking to me.
Wow.
It was a long time before anyone actually looked. It was like 2.5 years before someone actually even looked at my pelvis and told me what was happening. Cause I thought I had a stage 4 tear, and it was I thought I had I thought I had torn my anal sphincter.
Yeah.
But I hadn't. It was just the way that the scar tissue was impacting my pelvic floor.
Okay.
And then, a long journey. I went to Thailand. I got Thai massage twice a week for 3 months, and it was nerve line massage. So they start at your feet and work the energy lines up to your pelvis, and it should be a whole body thing, but there was so much in my legs and pelvis that it would be like a 2-hour session just on my legs. And I got Aviva Rom's book. It was in a used bookstore there that was called Natural Health After Birth. I'd never read anything like it. So I started seeing oh, this isn't a real thing. This isn't just me. This is something I need to understand. So that was my journey of postpartum the whole thing is in my book, but the postpartum journey is what led me to write it, because it was so hard for me to understand what happened to me and what I needed in order to recover.
Yeah, I'm definitely grateful for that book. That was my Bible for before I gave birth. It was the only book the book you just mentioned, I had also found, but your book is really the only thing out there that gives you a solid preparation and understanding of that time. So I tell every woman that crosses my path that they should definitely have that book and read it before they give birth. So thank you for putting that out into the world, for sure. So can you tell me a little bit about how your yeah, how crossing that threshold into motherhood was for you, how going back, I don't know if you went back into what you were doing before or if your career just turned. How was it to come into this new skin for you?
Well, I was a yoga teacher before that, and I was a body worker. So I did try to teach a few classes, but I didn't have any childcare. So some of them I took my daughter in a sling and I would just talk, and then I would give adjustments with one hand while she was, in the sling in the other. But my body was really injured, so I couldn't really demonstrate very well. And I also couldn't speak Portuguese well to teach yoga. So it was a bit of a puzzle. That's another reason why I had to leave, because I didn't have a way to earn any money. And I didn't want to put my daughter in full-time childcare, which I couldn't afford at that time anyway. But when I got back to the US, I had a teaching credential for elementary school. And so I got a job offer, but the job was going to pay like 32,000 and the childcare was going to be 18,000. And so I was just going to be barely breaking even. And I was like, I didn't become a mom to hand my kid over all day to take care of other people's kids and earn no money. So eventually I moved home with my parents, and I lived in 2008, which was the year the market crashed here. Very depressing time here in the US. My dad became sober. Was an alcoholic prior to that. His mental health was really not good. My parents were not really, they were like, willing to have me home, but not exactly like happy about that. And I had no childcare. So it was me and my daughter all day long. And my parents would occasionally watch her if I had work, but if it was just for me to like go for a walk or do something for me like that, they were occupied and not really that interested in helping in that way. They were helping because I was living with them, and they were, doing all this cohabitating with a toddler. But that's a little more normal in Latin culture than it is here. And in here, it's kind of considered a bit of a failure, yeah, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that I wanted to be with my daughter in those younger years. And I also, part of me was like, I might never get this again. I might never, there's no guarantee that I'm going to have another baby. I think I will, but I don't know for sure. And I want to be around for this. So when she was almost 2, I got a job in Thailand teaching a yoga teacher training. It was a 30-day job. It was a great job. They hired me childcare as part of the job. So childcare, the nannies in Thailand are like so caring and so warm. So I felt really comfortable with it. And I was just teaching in 2-hour increments, so I could nurse her in between. And I was potty training her at the time too. So, yeah, then after the teacher training, that's when I put together my first website. That's when I kind of had to come to Jesus, like, okay, either this, before I would say that was my calling. And now it was like, okay, either this is your career or you have to get a new career, because I knew I was going to have to be breadwinning and taking care of my daughter. So how am I going to now, like, how am I really going to do this? And, it took a long time, because caring for a child all day, every day, and, building a career is hard, but
yes,
I did it.
That's great. And so did you ever feel like it got in the way? Like, did you ever have moments of frustration? So I know there's a lot of moms out there that are dealing with that. And even if they do have a partner, they're trying to figure out how to place their mothering and how to place their career. Did you feel like there was friction there? Or did you just always know in your heart that you were like, this is what I need to be doing right now? And I also know at some point my career has to take over. So how was your experience of navigating the two together? Were you like...
I wasn't really even comfortable with the word career. So okay. I didn't really, I wasn't tormented. I was just basically like, how am I going to survive? Like, I wasn't like, oh, I have this voice in the world or this thing that I do that I love so much that I have to be doing. It was more like, I got to figure out how I'm going to have a livelihood. So what's that going to look like? I prior to that, my life was about my spiritual path pretty much, and was about teaching and learning and traveling around to study with the best teachers. And so I wasn't, no, I didn't have any sense that I had given up something to become a mom, that the becoming a mom was the thing I wanted most in my life. And so I was going to need to figure out, now that I was the mom and the dad and the whole thing, I had to figure it out. Okay, well, I wasn't going to go looking for someone to take care of me. So how am I going to make a career? And, and during that period of time, like I remember one time I found someone to take care of my daughter, and it wasn't easy because she was with me so much. It wasn't easy for her to be with someone else. So I would drop her somewhere, pay $15 an hour for babysitting, go teach a yoga class, make $45 and be like, what am I doing? Like, I just made $15, and how am I going to make this work? And so, I would say, I was stressed, not because of an identity issue. I was stressed because of a survival, and literal, not like, oh, how am I going to make enough money so that I have a crib and a this and a that? It was like, how am I going to make enough money so I can afford to pay rent? And it took a long time. I eventually moved back to Brazil, and I had a yoga studio in my house, and I did body work in my house. So I spent as much time as I could with my daughter, and Brazil was in a good place, really economically, and the spirit of the country was really good between 2008 and 2014, because we got the World Cup and the Olympics. But then when those actually happened, things started to decline. In 2014, I lived in Rio, and that's when the Olympics came to Rio. And the people who rented me a house wanted their house back, and that there was no way I could afford to get an apartment and a studio, because my house where I lived had both. So I knew and my daughter wanted to come and live closer to my parents. So I knew that I was leaving Brazil. But when I came back, I was in the same position where, like, there's a million yoga studios in San Diego. And I could get a job teaching because I'd taught for a long time. But I mean, if you make $100 in a yoga class, that's like amazing. So how much was I going to have to teach to do that? So I lived with my parents again for another year when my daughter was 7. And then I had former yoga students who offered me to live above their garage in a studio with not even a full kitchen, a half kitchen with a half refrigerator. And I lived there for a year when I had the book contract, because I was like, I can't write a book and have a full-time practice and be a mom. Like, I can't and pay. And, it's not like just because I didn't pay rent, I still have expenses. I still have a car to pay for, and food, like everything.
Yeah.
So it took a while for me to get on my feet to a place where I could, forget about saving money, where I was just not living month to month.
Yeah. Wow, that's really inspiring. And so to kind of bring all of this together, it sounds like you were such a super woman, like doing all these things, configuring all these things as you went and by yourself. What was your emotional state through all of this? Like, what was your feeling in your heart, and how did you navigate that?
I mean, I had every feeling, because, right, like it's a long process. So at different times I felt different ways, I mean, I felt all of the feelings.
I guess the question is more like, I know in my own experience, there were times that, and by no means my story was like yours, but there were times where it was hard to step out of the emotion and be present for what I needed to do now in this moment. So looking at your story and kind of imagining you going through it, I'm wondering, like, how did you cope with all of that, but at the same time have to put it behind you to do life because you were by yourself? You know what I mean? Like, because sometimes, it's very hard to deal with them. They can be overwhelming and debilitate you. So I just wonder, like, what if you felt like you needed to really shut that down, or if you had a way to process it so that you could be out in the world doing what you needed to do to make the money that you needed?
I think I'm just fluid with my emotions. Like
Okay.
I cry when I'm sad, and I don't really I don't really get super angry that often. My anger kind of is internalized, but you know, I have good friends, and I, yeah, I mean, I don't see it as like a discrete part of the process. I mean, for sure, there were periods of time that I was really confused, and I periods of time that I was thinking that my daughter's father would come to the US, and you know, dealing with relationship challenges. And I've dated, so dealing with men that have come in and out of our lives. But yeah, I don't know exactly how to answer. I mean, I think anyone listening, it's like, you just do it, right? Like I mean, you have a child that's there. I think it's almost harder when you don't have someone you're responsible to. It depends. I mean, on the one hand, then you can go to therapy, and then you can, spend time on your yoga mat, and you can process. But when you have a kid, it's like, the need is so immediate, right? Like, I've got to feed her. I can't just not feed her, like I've got to take her to the park. I've got to do these things. And so, I mean, I definitely was overwhelmed for a long time, and I still get overwhelmed. It's overwhelming, and definitely have had, yeah. But I just guess I think it's my path and my circumstances. So
Yeah, I like that. You're fluid with your emotions. I like that. There's more of like a lightness to it, of just, they come, they arise, they go, but this is what I have to do now. So that's really nice. So Kimberly, if there's like 2 or 3 things that you would tell another woman that's going through this, what would these things be, if any, that stand out
going
from
through
your
the
experience?
postpartum time.
Going through pregnancy into birth, and then into the postpartum. Yeah, the whole thing, going from not being a mother to being a mother.
Well, it's so different for every person, but what I've noticed lately is that because for so long, women were, I guess, felt like they couldn't say how they really felt about motherhood, or they couldn't say that it was hard for them, or that they didn't like it, or that there were certain parts of the experience that weren't pleasurable. There's kind of a pendulum swing to like say everything that you feel about it, and express just how much you don't like it, and how uncomfortable it makes you, and how much you have to give up, and how unfair it is, and how unjust it is. And I feel like we're missing something in that. I don't think it's about putting on a facade and pretending that things are great all the time. But I do feel that there's something to look for between feeling victimized, or feeling like something's been taken away from you. And so this thing about equality that we spoke about, I hear a lot of women so frustrated because they're more attuned to their children than their partner is. And their partner can sleep when they can't sleep, and they wake up when the baby cries, but their partner doesn't. And there's something really beautiful about the mother baby dyad, and there's something that's really reparative culturally if we can start to restore that. And I feel like we're going in the wrong direction when we're only beating the political battle cry of equality. Do I think that women should have equal rights? Absolutely. Do I think that that might not be an accurate biological representation of what happens? Absolutely. So we mix biology and physiology and politics. And I think that there's something innate to female power that we lose out on. And that because we live in this structure where we see male power everywhere, and we think that's what power looks like, but that's not true. There's a female power that's something much different than that. And pregnancy and birth and mothering give us clues about what that female power might be. So I would just encourage this, it's sort of two-sided. There's either the Instagram picture of motherhood where you wear your tight dress and you put the month there, and then you give birth, and then the mom disappears, and then it's just the baby with the number by it month by month. And everything's white and cream and sheepskin everywhere. Or there's the other that's like, this is so, like, I'm so oppressed by this. How does anyone do this? I don't like the bodily fluids. I don't like the way I look. I don't like this. I don't like that. And again, like, expression can be helpful and necessary, but those are such extreme polarities. And I don't think we have to say, like, we don't have to be like, we're goddesses and, but at the same time, this bond between the mother and the baby is at the center of culture. And when you lose that, you lose culture. And that's what we're seeing happening right now. Like, white Americans don't really have culture. And it's a result of being so disconnected from the earth and so disconnected from this elemental relationship that really sets everything in motion going forward. So to the extent that's possible, learning how to enjoy it and learning how to enjoy the small moments. And I have to say that as stressful as things were for me in a lot of different moments, and maybe as isolated as I felt, and I enjoyed it, and it was what I wanted. So I know some people are having babies that maybe aren't their first choice, or they were ambivalent and all those things. And that's different, but it's what I wanted. And I was there for it, like, I don't look back and say, oh, I missed out. I didn't miss out on anything. I was right there, and I remember it all, so to the extent that you can have yourself tuned to the things that are enjoyable. The other thing is that when women look back on their lives and they're asked what is their favorite part of their life, they choose the part statistically with young children. So the part that's the hardest while you're going through it, the part that you're just at your wit's end, where you want to shut yourself in the bathroom. Or I used to fantasize about hitting my daughter over the head with a frying pan just so that I could just knock her out for a second and just have peace and quiet for a few hours. Those are the things that when you look back, people look back on so fondly. And so once I learned that, I was like, oh, I want to enjoy it as it's happening. As chaotic and crazy and suffocating and maddening as it is, it passes, and now I have a 14-year-old who, doesn't need me as much, doesn't, comes in, but we're connected because of the earlier relationship, and all of that time pays off.
Thank you for that point of view. That's really important to hear and to keep in mind, for sure. Yeah. Thank you. That really summarizes it. Like, 0 words left. You really took the heart. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kimberly, how can someone connect with you if they feel so inclined?
You can go to my website, KimberlyAnnJohnson.com, or I'm on the socials.
Yeah. And you have a wonderful podcast as well. Can you name it here?
Yeah, my podcast is called Sex, Birth, Trauma.
Okay. Yeah, I highly recommend that to everybody. Thank you for having that out there. It's been wonderful to listen to. Well, thank you so much for your time here with us. I'm really grateful, and I wish you the best, and I look forward to reading your new book, which I just ordered.
Thanks so much.
All right, Kimberly, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.